How do I know if I have ADHD or not? So I get this question a lot, usually by friends, family members, people that I meet when I tell them that I have ADHD. And I'm sure some of you watching may have found something on TikTok, social media, or something online, or a friend may have told you that they think you have ADHD, but you want to know for yourself. I will state the obvious, everyone doesn't have ADHD. But with that being said, with an increase in awareness, many people are now starting to realize that they may have ADHD based on the information they've read, a video, a post, a tweet they've seen, and they're wondering, could this be it? Could this be why my brain is feeling like all the time? There's no greater feeling than reading something, speaking to someone, and realizing that you actually might have ADHD, because it would help to answer so many questions you're having about your brain, why you do certain things, why things aren't clicking. So what I will say, there is a lot of information about ADHD online, especially on different social media platforms, again, which is great. Don't hate me, but what I will say is that there are a difference in posts, right? So you have people posting about things very specific to ADHD, and then you have people posting things from their perspective as someone who has ADHD, and they're very different. So for example, people with ADHD struggle with procrastination. That is an ADHD trait. And of course, people who don't have ADHD could also struggle with procrastination. Here is the big difference, in my opinion. Procrastination. Someone with ADHD, let's say, has a toothache, and we know we have a toothache and we know we need to go to the dentist, but we procrastinate, we get distracted, there are just so many things going on at once, so our brains are like this. But the toothache persists, and we put it off until it's too late. It's causing us so much pain that we're forced to actually do the thing. And then when we get to the dentist, we need a filling or a root canal, which is going to cost us, and it's going to be very painful because of procrastination, right? Compared to, let's say, someone who doesn't have ADHD, yes, they might put it off, but there will be a moment where they say, okay, right, got my head screwed on, not distracted, I'm going to book this appointment and I'm going to sort out this toothache before it spirals into something worse. So that's how I kind of see the difference between how ADHD traits impact people with ADHD and people who don't have ADHD from my perspective. So I hope I haven't offended anyone. Are you still with me? Hopefully that example was helpful to people who think they might have ADHD, and also people who do have ADHD and just needed someone to validate their experiences. Next, so you think you might have ADHD, you've seen a video, you've read an article, you saw a tweet, and then you've just gone down the rabbit hole of doing so many of those online ADHD tests, or just doing a lot of research, but there is so much information to take in. What would I suggest? So one thing I would suggest is looking at the ADHD diagnostic criteria, the DSM. Yes, I know it's not perfect, it needs to be updated. However, this is what a lot of doctors are using when assessing whether people have ADHD or not. And I think we will do ourselves a disservice as advocates saying the DSM is not valid, we shouldn't be looking at it, and somebody else thinks they have ADHD, but then finding different things from Tom, Bobby, Susie, and decides not to kind of look at the DSM. And again, there are comorbidities I will come on to talk about later. For me, I initially found just reading the DSM helpful when I started the process of getting diagnosed around 5 years ago today, because it helped me to know whether I think I might have ADHD at least. If you've watched my previous videos, I thought I had early onset dementia, got tested for that, it wasn't that, so I really wanted to be sure and have at least a decent foundation to know whether I was on the right track. So with the DSM, it lists quite a few ADHD traits. Again, I'm saying it's not the perfect model, but for me, I felt like it was a good starter for 10. And actually following that, the one thing I would say the DSM lacks is some examples of ADHD in adulthood, which is why I did create these ADHD flashcards where it lists the traits, but then there are examples, descriptions, and top tips to help adults manage their ADHD. So I know it's a shameless plug, but it's helped thousands of people, so why not? The thing I suggest that is really important if you think you might have ADHD is actually to look at what else falls under the term neurodivergent, to like the other neurotypes, whether it's autism, OCD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, BPD, Tourette. I am probably forgetting a few, forgive me, because what a lot of people seem to do is talk about, let's say, dyspraxic traits under the guise of ADHD, and I don't know whether that's because some people they have both and they just haven't stated that they have both. They're misinformed, or they're just doing that to kind of engagement bait, because what you could have done is watch the video with someone, let's say, listing dyspraxic traits and saying it's ADHD, and then you go and book an appointment with your GP and list out all of these dyspraxic traits and say, yeah, I think this is ADHD, when they're probably going to turn around and say, I don't think you have ADHD based on what you've told me. So that's why I think it's important. And again, yes, you can have ADHD and have both. Again, lots of people do, they co-occur. So it's just important just to make sure that you have an understanding of the other neurotypes that you could have, as well as ADHD, alongside ADHD, or just have and maybe not ADHD. So that's just a suggestion. This video isn't me telling people need to meet these criteria to have ADHD. I cannot diagnose anyone. I think in my over 3 years of advocacy, my primary goal is to raise awareness about ADHD through my experiences and through what I know and based on what I'm dealing with. And there is just so much out there, some information very useful, some not so useful, and so this video will hopefully guide people in the right way to make the best decision for themselves. Some of you might be wondering, why haven't I just said just go and get an ADHD diagnosis? Because it's actually not that simple. Okay, so as I mentioned, in the DSM, there are a lot of examples in childhood, and that's because it said ADHD is said to be present in childhood leading into adulthood. So in some countries, some doctors won't even take an appointment with adults who think they might have ADHD, because in their mind it should have been diagnosed in childhood. And in my case, when I actually booked an initial appointment with my GP and told her that I thought I had ADHD, she told me, I don't think you have ADHD, you've graduated and you had a good job. I did have to give her examples in both childhood and adulthood, which the DSM did help with, but then also I did have to provide school reports in childhood, and if not, my doctor would have spoken to my parents. In some cases they do speak to partners, but they do go way back. So I was diagnosed via the UK NHS system, which took me 1 year and 6 months. Nowadays it's taken anywhere from 2 to 5 years to even just get an appointment with a psychiatrist to do an ADHD assessment. So again, that's the problem. It's going to take someone years potentially to find out whether or not they have ADHD. However, there is an alternative to go to a private provider, and again, this is specifically in the UK, but that's going to cost you hundreds of pounds to get, and some people just don't have the money right now to pay for an assessment, which is why there is beauty in knowledge and understanding ADHD for yourself. And again, no one can tell you more about your brain or your experience than you can yourself. And so one thing I should say, that whilst you're waiting and figuring things out, it doesn't hurt to, Google maybe coping strategies, tips, different things that can help you to manage your ADHD better in the absence of assessment or a diagnosis, in the absence of medication. What do these tips look like? There are loads. So I've included them in the flashcards that I showed you earlier on. People have said therapy and body doubling, things like protective procrastination, gamification using the reward system. And again, a lot of these things I'm throwing out there, it may not work for you, and that's okay. A lot of ADHD coping strategies won't work for everyone, or might not be best suitable for everyone, I should say. So certain things for me, being able to trick my brains into doing things, or using a reward system, giving myself a reward at the end, is going to work for me because that's what I'm motivated by. Exercising is said to work well for some people, and a whole bunch of other stuff. The thing I found really invaluable is the online ADHD community, especially on X, Twitter. For me, all I had to do was type in #AskADHD in the search bar, and then I saw so many people asking questions. I typed ADHD in the search bar and was able to connect with so many people with ADHD. So if you have a question, you can type up your question, write #AskADHD, you can message me directly, and there are going to be so many people who are usually more than happy to answer your question. If Twitter X isn't your thing, there are Facebook communities, and there are also really, really good ADHD podcasts. That really helped me to feel like less alone, especially in the early days when I had nobody to talk about having ADHD, it was actually really inspiring listening to people in, you know, their successful career fields, or just being able to navigate life and share tips, but also validate your experiences. So I found podcasts really helpful. I would say the one thing I guess slightly regret telling people that I think I could have ADHD, because there is so much stigma, there's like a misconception, there are so many myths about ADHD, and people will look at me and say, no way, you don't have ADHD, you're completely fine, there's nothing wrong with you, it's definitely not ADHD. Can lead you to second guess yourself. I started telling people when I had already started the process, so I think after I saw my first psychiatrist, but if I had mentioned it to those people before I saw my psychiatrist, I probably would have talked myself out of pursuing an ADHD assessment and diagnosis. So what I will say, if that has already happened to you, again, like I said earlier on, you know your brain better than most people. You know when your brain is going like this, or when your brain is going like this, or when you're struggling to be motivated to get up in the morning, or when you're working on something that's taken you a couple of days to do when it really should have taken you a couple of hours to do. So again, don't let anybody else invalidate your experience and how you feel. If you're able to, I would suggest in a perfect world get an ADHD assessment, but for reasons I mentioned earlier on, that's not going to be the case for everyone. If you're in the position and you can afford to, or you have access to it, don't let self-doubt, other people's opinions dissuade you from that, because you deserve to kind of like know and understand your brain better, or to have answers for some of the questions you might have. I know before I got diagnosed with ADHD, I had so many questions, like, come on, I told you I thought I had early onset dementia and I was in my early 20s, sat in my GP doing a memory test. It sounds ridiculous, but when you can't seem to make sense of like your brain or what's going on around you, it kind of like drives you to that point. And my last piece of advice is to go easy on yourself. I mean, having ADHD isn't a death sentence. Yes, there are a lot of stigma surrounding it, and it can be very difficult to speak to your family and friends about it and to feel accepted. But I'd say after being diagnosed and having access to like treatment and support, I feel like I understand myself better, and I'm better able to communicate my needs to people, and also it helps me to kind of like work to my strengths. I'm not saying ADHD is a superpower, but I think just being very clear-headed, having structured thoughts. I'm out of breath. I've just been running up the stairs because I needed to get this point. Has helped me to work to my strengths and just feel better about myself from like a self-esteem perspective. That's all from me. Comment if you found this helpful. If you have any questions, do leave it in the comments. I will do a future video on like post ADHD diagnosis, what happens, because it doesn't come with a manual, a blueprint, a checkbook. You're kind of like figuring things out. Like, comment and subscribe. Drop any questions you have in the chat, and see you soon.